Hi, it's Elaine Shannon from the Cipher Brief. We're talking today with Mike Chavarria, who was a senior DEA official for a number of years, focused on Mexico, and we're all very interested in what the White House means when the White House says now Mexico and the Mexican cartels are national security threats. In fact, the worst national security threat to Americans. Mike penetrated the most important and oldest cartel and knows a thing or two about what they're about. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to clarify that whatever opinions are represented, they're mine. I'm a retired DEA agent. I don't represent DEA, and I'm not going to, talk the company line, so to speak. These are my opinions based on the experience that I've had over the many years.
And you've had a lot of experience in Guadalajara, which is ground zero for the cartels originally, Mexico City, Mexicali, La Paz, Bolivia, San Jose, um, and then Houston, where your group was focused on the Gulf cartels. Now there are more cartels. They've kind of atomized. When you hear that the U.S. military and the CIA are now supposed to be engaged on the border, what does that tell you? And is that a good thing or a bad thing, or it depends?
I think it's a good thing. The more resources we throw at the drug prop issue, facing us from the Mexican side, the better. I think when we start talking about, um, you know, strikes in Mexico, I think maybe that's a little bit too much. That's over the top, and I think it's more political theater than anything else. It's not practical. It's an act of war. Of course, we need to defend our borders, but yeah, the drugs. Where are they coming from? They're coming from Mexico, namely fentanyl and methamphetamine. Are the biggest threats that we're facing right now. Of course, cocaine's still coming in, marijuana's still coming in, heroin is still coming in. But where are most of the drugs coming through? They're coming through the ports of entry. You can ask any immigration official or um, the border patrol agents, and they'll tell you that 90%, let's just say fentanyl, 90% of fentanyl is coming through the ports of entry. And we're not catching very much of it because they're coming through in big conveyances like tractor trailers with sophisticated hydraulic systems that it would take hours to search. And it's like a needle in a haystack for those working along the border to do that in the at the ports of entry. So it's really we're fighting uphill battle.
Well, what about the labs? Can we hit the labs? There's talk this week. NBC had a story that said that the military is exploring using drones to go and drones to go hit labs. What do you think about that?
I think it can be used effectively, um, but it we have to have a the will of the government in Mexico, and because we cannot act unilaterally. We're not the police in Mexico, so we can provide the intelligence based on what we collect from. The use of drones, but we have to rely on our counterparts to execute. And the years that I spent in Mexico, that was always the frustration of it all. We would pass on exact specific intelligence where to go to grab people like Chapo Guzman, for example. We called him Casper the Ghost because every time we, you know, passed information to our counterparts, in this case, the CIA's counterparts, the military, they would have just missed him. So there was the teapot still hot, food on the table, but no Chapo, which really it became obvious that the operations were compromised. And so that is really the bottom line between the two agendas in the United States and Mexico. The agendas will never line up. They never have lined up because they see the issue from different perspectives. There's an insatiable appetite in this country, meaning demand. We cannot live without our drugs in this country. So the issue, the problem, is really ours. And then the insatiable appetite for the ill-gotten gains in Mexico. So everybody's getting high here. We're getting high on this side from drugs, and the Mexican political elites, the powerful elites, are getting high on the money obtained from the most lucrative business industry in the world.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
Well, Mike, you and I were talking the other day, and we were talking about this problem because what else is there to talk about? And you said something that really grabbed me. You said, we're playing poker with a country that has always won at the poker table. Now, I don't usually think of Mexico as the country that's always winning at the poker table, but maybe it is. What do you mean?
Well, ever since reading your book, one of my favorites, by the way, Desperados,
Thank you.
um, I took a real interest because I had just come on the job late '85 after Camarena, and I took a real interest because I wanted to go and work in Mexico. I wanted to understand what it was like in Mexico, and after working the number of years that I had spent in Mexico, I developed the realization that what drives Mexican policies is corruption. Corruption is like the grease that keeps the machine going. And there's nothing on earth that we're going to do to change that. And so the Mexicans have played a game of convincing us that they have the interest in fighting the drug war when there's no evidence that they have been fighting the drug war. In fact, the only drug war being fought here is in the USA, on our streets. Other than that, I think it's just it's a game of poker. It's a smoke and mirrors issue in Mexico.
So if they're not really going to do anything and they're really just playing us to get money or get cooperation or keep trade going or whatever it is they want, then why don't we do something unilaterally?
Well, I'm all in favor of operating unilaterally. I just don't think that dropping ordnance in Mexico is the right thing to do. First of all, like I said, it's an act of war. And unlike radical Islam terrorists who are actually out to kill us in our country, I don't see that on them from Mexico. I see they're killing us by sending the drugs that we're asking for, but I don't see that they are a threat in that regard, a terroristic threat in this country. I think calling them terrorists is accurate because when you look at the indiscriminate violence that is perpetrated on innocents in that country, I mean, it is a state out of control. And the drug traffickers have morphed from being organized during the days when you wrote your book, to now where they're so fractured. We've birthed what I call PlayStation drug traffickers. So they drop their little PlayStation PlayStation games, and they grab an AK-47 and they go out and raise holy hell out in the streets, and nobody's safe.
Exactly. Well, I should mention that the book we're talking about is a book I wrote about the murder in Mexico, in Guadalajara, of Kiki Camarena, a DEA agent who was uh, kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and then his body was disappeared. The police were deeply involved, and the corruption that and the cover up went up to Mexico City, to the highest levels of the Mexican government. The U.S. put on extreme pressure on Mexico and stopped trade, stopped the border. The Customs Commissioner, Willie Van Rob, just stopped the border, as President Trump has been trying to do. And they found the body. They discovered it, but they knew where it was all the time. The murder was horrific. It got American law enforcement very deeply engaged in fighting Mexico, but the White House, the State Department, Treasury, all and many in Congress wanted to stop the pressure on Mexico because of regular trade, legitimate trade, because there's so much money involved on that side. The cartels have only grown since then, as we all know. Now, tell us about the cartel picture. There used to be like one, and then there were two. Now, what do you see?
There are just multiple cartels. During the era where you wrote Desperados, there were 3 or 4 major cartels. You had the Gulf Cartel, you had the Juarez Cartel, you had the Guadalajara Cartel that grew into what we referred to as the Sinaloa Federation, and then you had the Arellano Felix organization, which became the Tijuana Cartel. Since that period of time, which was in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, things started to fall apart. There was infighting, not only between cartels, but there was infighting amongst the leadership within the very cartels. So over a period of time, they fractured for a number of reasons, partly due to the pressures that we placed on Mexico to enforce their drug laws, and partly because of politics in Mexico, where they decided to focus on one cartel while leaving another cartel untouched. But the byproduct was they produced so many mini cartels or organizations that we can't even keep track of how many there are. So right now, the threats are CJNG, which is basically the Jalisco cartel, which morphed after Nacho Coronel of the Sinaloa cartel was killed, and the remaining leaders of the Valencia or the Millennium cartel, they were arrested. What became was the CJNG or the Jalisco cartel. The other cartel that is a threat to us is the Sinaloa cartel. And right now, the leaders that we had come to know by name, by watching Netflix Narcos shows, they're all gone. Chapo Guzman, Mayo Zambada, they're here in the United States, but their remnants are still powerful, and they're still in operation, and they're still sending, multi-ton quantities of methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and of course, marijuana and heroin.
And we should mention that probably the younger generation is probably even smarter and better at technology. Can we talk for a minute about technologies that they use to make their business flow better and beat our surveillance?
Well, just as we use drones, the bad guys use drones. They have military-grade weapons. Drug traffickers have been supported by rogue Israeli intelligence organizations. We have seized equipment obtained from Israel, like cell site equipment that the drug traffickers use in Mexico. So we know that they're in bed with organized crime throughout the world. Everybody from motorcycle gangs to the yakuza is in bed with the CJNG or the Jalisco cartel. These are organizations that are growing outside of Mexico. Sinaloa has been cultivating and training organizations throughout Central America. I'm from my family has roots in Costa Rica, and now I'm realizing that Costa Rica has become a hotbed for narco violence and narco corruption, and it is closely linked to the Sinaloa cartel.
And let's talk about China. Sinaloa has representatives in China too, doesn't it?
Well, China and India, principally China, they're the major source of supply for the precursor chemicals and essential chemicals that are used in manufacturing fentanyl. And so there are hundreds, if not more, small companies that are just sending mass quantities of these chemicals to Mexico. They're even sending it to the United States, um, using all sorts of clever uh, methods to get it into Mexico. But it's a problem. It's a major problem for us. And I know there are statistics showing there's a slowing of or a decreased number of seizures at the border. But what that tells me is that organizations like the Sinaloa cartel and the CJNG, they're just hibernating right now because they're waiting things out. They understand the dynamic going on between President Scheinbaum in Mexico and President Trump, and they can wait us out.
They have before. What about China's involvement in handling money for the cartels? The cartels exist to make money. They're not ideological at all, as I understand it. And they've needed a way to handle huge volumes of cash that they collect ultimately from the street. China, I understand, has been very instrumental in moving money all over the world for them. Is that what you are hearing?
Absolutely. Well, China owns so much in our country that it's easily facilitated the movements of money, the laundering of money, money remitters. When I was in Houston towards the end of my career, we were focused on Chinese and Vietnamese money remitters who are moving money through Canada, from Canada down to Latin America, into Mexico, into Panama, down to Colombia, back to China. It's crazy how much money was being. And then, of course, when I was face to face with Ociel Cardenas, the head of the Gulf cartel, who was sent to us, um, extradited in 2007, January of 2007, he basically told me, look, there's nothing like good old fashioned bulk money transfers. He says, there are millions of dollars coming south across the border, and there's nothing you all can do about it.
What do you mean by bulk money transfer?
Millions of dollars placed in a pickup truck, in a sedan, driven by a family um, from the United States right through the border, right into Mexico, with not so much as even a, hey, would you stop and let me look in your trunk?
Well, there are tens of millions of cars that go south every month, so they can't be searched. And in fact, Mexico isn't searching, is it?
They do periodically, sporadically. They do search vehicles. I've had a vehicle searched before, um, but it's not enough. I mean, the Mexicans have not yet been motivated to patrol their side of the border, whether it's drugs coming north or money going south. Why? Because it is in their best interest to get money coming south. There's not an aspect of the economy in Mexico that does not benefit either directly or indirectly from drug trafficking.
One final question. Now that the American intelligence community is supposed to be involved, what can they bring to the party? What can they bring to the table that would be of use to law enforcement trying to stop what's now transnational organized crime? It's not just about narcotics anymore. It's also about human trafficking, migrants, guns, many other gray market businesses and black market businesses. So the intelligence community is the best in the world. What can they do for you and people like you?
Well, we've become a member of the DEA has become a member of the intelligence community, and we embrace the partnership with them. They have sources we don't. We have sources they don't. Combined, I mean, we don't need to share the identities of these sources in order to use the information that's forthcoming that we obtain from these sources. So, if it's a combined effort, we can make some headway. But in Mexico, we need a partnership of the Mexicans, and there has to be a will of the government to make some progress.
That happened in Colombia, didn't it?
Yes, it did. The Colombian model was something that was a success. There was a legitimate war being fought, and the Colombians, many Colombian law enforcement and military died in the process. Um, for many of our politicians who didn't understand, there's a huge difference between Colombia and Mexico, and we have the habit of trying to, you know, one size fits all, and that is just not the case. No matter where we are in the world, Colombia is a different animal than Mexico. Mexico has been much more challenging. Again, as illustrated by your book, Desperados. Um, we've we've spent between from 2008 to the present, or 2008 to 2021, over $3 billion trying to resource the war on drugs. Um, I don't see where's the beef. Haven't seen much of a dent.
And why is Colombia more committed, if that's what you're saying?
The Colombians were more committed to the drug war. There was a drug war bilaterally fought. They welcomed U.S. participation. I remember I was down there when Pablo Escobar was being tracked. My wife, who was an analyst with DEA, she was down there helping the Colombians both on Escobar investigation at Cali, and the Colombians were in fact, driven to resolve their issues. I hadn't seen that in Mexico in all the years I've spent, and I've been down there since 1986.
The power of the cartels, the power of money, what is it?
It's it's what drives, it's greed and power. And in Mexico, you have relatively small group of elitists that hold the power and control the power, and they don't want things to change, because if things change, then then they lose control. Right now, there's that poker game going on between the two countries, between the two presidents, and time will tell. You know who who ends up showing their aces, and how far we get with making progress, joint bilateral progress. Right now, they've sent a good number of people up here, people that we wanted, but nobody really there represents the Sinaloa cartel. Um, they still seem to be the cartel who is protected. And from the time I was in Mexico, during the Fox administration, the Calderon administration, and onward, it has been the Sinaloa cartel who has been less affected by law enforcement efforts, operations.
And it sounds like you don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
I'm hopeful, but I'm a bit pessimistic about it all.
Well, we'll see. I think you have to be pretty optimistic to even be in law enforcement or intelligence. So we all hope that things improve.
Well,
Everybody's
we have to
working
keep
hard.
fighting. We have
Yeah.
to keep fighting, or it's like a gardener. If you're not cutting the weeds, then they'll grow into a jungle, and you're stuck with the jungle of weeds. So
Yes.
we have to do
Mike,
our part.
thank you again for taking your time to tell us the reality on the ground. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.